All right, well, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Adam Wade, Director of Marketing at Mediacurrent, and I'll be the moderator for today's presentation. The presenter today is Derek DeRaps, a Drupal developer here at Mediacurrent, and he'll be presenting on Drupal 8 vocab lesson. So, as always, we are recording this webinar and we'll leave time at the end of the presentation for Q&A. So, Derek, I'll go ahead and pass the presentation over to you.
Thanks a lot, Adam. All right. Just to be clear, this has nothing to do with taxonomies. This is, a sort of vocab lesson about all the different terms that are being introduced into Drupal 8 from Symfony. So a lot of the terms that we as Drupal developers may not be familiar with, we're going to talk about today, and just sort of an intro for people coming from Drupal 7, what some of these things mean. And a little bit of background, I went to DrupalCon Portland earlier this year, and I took a training on Symfony and how it integrates with Drupal 8, and there were so many different terms thrown out there during that, that 8 hours of intense training that, it took a while for all of that, to absorb all of that. So I wanted to just sort of pass on some of that information and sort of help get people up to speed on what some of these things mean that you're going to be seeing as you start developing with Drupal 8. So the items we're going to talk about today is just kind of a hodgepodge of the items that I personally was unfamiliar with coming into Drupal 8 and Symfony, and some of the terms that were sort of most confusing to me when I first started. So first we're going to talk about YAML. So initially it was set up as a markup language, but they decided that it was more of a data serialization language than it was a markup language. So they changed it to YAML ain't a markup language. And how that affects us as Drupal developers is that the first place you'll see it is when you're creating a module, and your .info file will now be using YAML to define the configuration in your .info file rather than sort of Drupal's custom markup that we used. And we'll also be seeing it in a few other places that we'll get to at the end of the presentation. I'm going to hold off on all this hands-on part until the very end. So we'll have some demonstrations of how to write YAML and some places where it's going to be used in our custom modules. Okay, the next term we'll talk about is Composer. Composer is actually a standalone PHP tool to manage packages and library dependencies. It's not part of Drupal core, nor is it part of Symfony. It is a standalone PHP tool that Drupal uses to manage its dependencies. And in Drupal 8, very soon there will be a module called Composer Manager that will take care of a lot of the headache for us automatically. But I wanted to go ahead and show you today how to use Composer manually to update your package dependencies and the libraries that are installed in your Drupal site. Next is PSR 0. PSR stands for a Proposal for Standards Recommendation, and basically it's just a sort of an agreement put forth by the PHP community, specifically the framework interoperability group. And the goal of PSR 0 is to define a standard way for us to define and write our classes and the file structure that they're put into, to make it easier to auto-load those classes. And so what that means for us in Drupal 8 is that we'll have a lot fewer calls to include and require once, and And a lot of that headache, a lot of that work is going to be taken care of for us automatically. So the two takeaways from this are that when you create your classes in your Drupal 8 module, they need to be put into a directory structure that corresponds with their namespace. And so if you're writing a custom module or a contrib module, the namespace is always going to start with Drupal / your module's name, and then you can have subdirectories within that as well. So on disk, it looks a little bit messy actually, because of course you've got to have all of your modules code you can use now instead of being in sites all. And so inside your modules custom directory, or modules contrib directory, depending what you're working on, you will have your module, and then inside of it a lib directory, which is where you put all of your namespace classes. And so you have to recreate the namespace hierarchy within that lib directory. So you'll have a directory called Drupal / and then another directory which is just your module name, and then inside of that directory is where you'll have all of your class files. And also potentially you'll have subdirectories within that for your class files. So the other important takeaway is that you can only have one class within a PHP file. So and they need to have the same name. So if you are writing my class, then you would need to be inside of a file called myclass.php. And we'll see an example of that at the end of the presentation. Okay, dependency injection. It's kind of a scary sounding term, and it's intimidating, but really it's a quite simple idea. And the way that I learned the most about it was watching Kat Bailey's presentation at DrupalCon Portland, and her video is up on the DrupalCon Portland site. So I really recommend watching that for some more background. But basically the idea is that dependency injection is a really good pattern to follow, because it makes our code more reusable, more testable, and less hacky. And so what we want to do is, instead of instantiating our objects within our class, any sort of objects we're going to be using, data objects or sort of workhorse objects, we want to pass those objects into our class rather than instantiating them ourselves. And the idea, the best example for this is, let's say you were writing a mailer class, and there are lots of different ways you can send mail, right? You can use SMTP, you can use send mail, you can use null transport. There's a lot of different ways you can send it. And so with dependency injection, you would when you instantiate the mailer class, you would pass it the transport you want the mailer class to use, rather than creating that transport object inside of your class. And so the idea here is that the less your code knows, the more reusable it is. And Kat Bailey said that sometimes being ignorant is a good thing. Okay, next we'll talk about service containers. So first we need to define what a service is in Symfony. So a service is basically just a PHP object that performs some sort of global task. And so that's different from sort of a more micro, or sort of a smaller object that is just maybe holds some data or something like that. A service is going to be something that's used on a more global level, perhaps to define or to return responses to certain paths on your site or something like that. And a service container, it's also called a dependency injection container, is just sort of a factory that that handles the instantiation of those services. So we'll see an example of this in a minute, where you'll write a YAML file, configuration file, to tell Drupal what sort of services you're going to define, and then Drupal will use that configuration that you define to go ahead and instantiate and create those objects for you. So the container is just another object that handles the it's a factory that handles the creation of those service objects. Okay, and lastly, we're going to talk about routing, and this is best done hands-on, so we'll take a look at that. But routing in Drupal 8 is going to be, well, it's actually going to be the exact same as in, or it's going to be very similar as it was in Drupal 7 in terms of, hook menu and things like that are still going to be there and available for you to use. But there are ways that you don't actually have to use hook menu at all, and we're going to take a look at an example of that. So that's kind of the case with a lot of things in Drupal 8. There are, a lot of the sort of Drupal way of doing things that weren't very PHP standard are still included in Drupal 8 and will still be there for the time being, and will likely be phased out in Drupal 9. So the sooner you learn the Drupal 8 way of doing things, the better. Okay, now we're going to switch over and look at some code, and we're going to start with looking at a YAML file. All right, so you can see I have a fresh checkout of Drupal 8 here, and I've created a custom module called KS Demo. All right, and we're going to take a look at the info file for KS Demo module. Formerly, it would have just been ksdemo.info would have been the name of the info file for your Drupal 7 module. Now it's .info.yaml. And here's the basic layout of your info YAML file. It's the same as it was in Drupal 7, except instead of having equal signs to define your module configuration, now with YAML you use colons. And so we have to give it a name, a description, and this is something new in Drupal 8, is we give it a type. So we call it, this is a module, but it could also be, you use this for themes and features, etc. So this is a really, really basic YAML file. Yeah, there's no indentation, there's no arrays, anything like that. Okay, next we're actually going to go back to the very beginning of our presentation. And we're going to look at Composer. So you see this link here for getcomposer.org/installer. This is the link to actually download the Composer executables, the PHP executable. So in our demo here, what we're actually going to be trying to do with it is, we're not going to get all the way through it today, but the idea behind the demo module is that we want to sort of catch 404 errors on our site and send out an email to the site administrator when a 404 happens. And so in order to do that, we just for the sake of this demo, we want to use the SwiftMailer PHP package to send that to send that email. And so the Swift mailer is not part of Drupal core, of course, and so we need to add that package uh, to Drupal. And so what we need to do is use Composer to add that package to our project. So I'm in the root of the project right here, and Drupal core comes with this composer.json file. And what the composer.json file does is it tells the composer what projects. Well, first it tells you, it tells Composer a little bit about the project that it's working in, and then it tells what the dependencies are of our project. And so by default, this is what these are all of the requirements currently in Drupal core. And you can see there's a lot of Symfony, there's Twig, and then there's Ascetic. There's a lot of different projects that Drupal core depends on. And so, but we want to add something to it. And like I said, in the future, this is going to be a lot easier using the Composer Manager module. But for now, until that happens, we're just going to manually modify this composer.json. So what we need to do is add a line into the requirements. And so you might be saying, okay, so I know I want the Swift mailer package, but how do I know, what to put here? Well, what you do is you go to packages.org and you search for the package that you're going to be adding, Swift mailer. And the line you want is right here where it says require. This is the text you want to add into your composer.json. So you come in here, you add it in, and for those of you, who are most familiar with PHP arrays, note that with YAML you can't have a trailing comma after the last item. Sorry, this is JSON. You can't have a comma after the last item in the JSON array. So we save that. So now we've told our composer, we've put the requirement in our composer.json, but we haven't actually done anything with it yet. So now what we need to do is actually, like I showed you in here, we actually need to get the composer executable. Oops. Oh, I can't highlight that. Well, we'll just type it in manually. So what we want to do is we'll use curl git composer.org/install, and then we're going to pass it into PHP. Now I'm using PHP MAMP to make sure I'm using the correct version of PHP that I want to use in my system. So I run that, and of course I'm getting some sort of errors. Oh, installer. Let's try that again. There we go. So now we're downloading Composer. And once that finishes, there we go. It's already done. We execute it by calling php composer.far. So now the executable is right in the root of our project. We tell it we want to update the package that we just added. So if we were to hit enter right now and hit update, it would look through all of the packages, all the required packages in our composer.json, and it would update any of those that had a newer version. Now, we don't want to do that for sure because Drupal core is not necessarily using, it's using very specific versions of its packages, and so we don't want to go in and update all of its Symfony packages to the latest. We want to update just the one that we just added. So we do php composer.far update swiftmailer/swiftmailer. And the reason it's in there twice, swiftmailer/swiftmailer, is because it's kind of just the standard where it starts with sort of the main project name and then the sub-project name, or sometimes it's sort of like the author/project, something like that. So. And I think I've already run this before on this project, so it may not have anything to do. While that's running, I'm going to go ahead and show you what it's doing in the background there. What it's doing is actually connecting to, I guess, packages.org or wherever the repository is for that package, and downloading the library into our vendors directory. So inside of the Drupal root, you got this directory called core, and inside of that you have the vendor directory that contains all of the packages downloaded by Composer. And so you can see in here, now we have one called SwiftMailer. So SwiftMailer, and there's the package that's been automatically downloaded for us. Another important thing to remember about Composer is that it is not a system-wide package manager like Pacman for Arch Linux or Aptitude or any of the other Unix style package managers for the system. This is purely on a project basis. Now you can install composer.far, the executable, sort of system-wide, so you don't need to download it for every project, but it's still acting on a single composer.json file for your individual project. So each site, each project that you have can have different versions of the same packages. They can have different dependencies, and so it keeps it all separated on a project basis. Okay, moving on. Now let's take a look at an example of how we would use or how we would implement PSR0 in our custom module. So we're going to close that, and so now we're back at our document root. We're going to go into our modules directory, custom, ksdemo, and you can see I have this lib directory. So I'm going to go into lib, and actually let's pretend that I had just created this module, and so none of it existed yet. So what I would need to do when I want to start creating my own custom namespace classes is that I would need to create the proper directory structure for them in my custom module. So I would make directory -p lib Drupal ksdemo, and then if I wanted any subdirectories in there, I could add those in there too. All right, and so now you can see I've already created two custom classes in here. One is a controller and another is an event subscriber. Let's take a look at the event subscriber. All right, now at the top of your file you need to declare the namespace, and so very clearly this one is namespace inside Drupal /ksdemo. Now I could move this into if I had more than one event subscriber, I could do something like event subscriber. I can make a directory and then move the class file into there, and then change the namespace to have that extra level on the end. But for now, we're just going to leave it there. And then you can see up here, instead of having, there are three different classes that we're using in three different objects that we're using in our custom class. And so now instead of using includes or requires or require onces, all we have to do is specify the use keyword and then specify the project namespace followed by the class name. So for example, the event subscriber interface, which we're going to implement here, is inside of Symfony component event dispatcher. Now you'll notice we didn't need to do anything, we didn't need to use the Drupal root constant or the dir anything like that. All we have to do is know the namespace and the class name, and the autoloader will take care of the rest. So it's really handy. It's a lot cleaner, and it's really nice. So we're creating an event subscriber class, and it's implementing the event subscriber interface. Now the first thing, coming from a Drupal 7 background, or really a lot of different backgrounds, is why wouldn't I want to call this, you know, you know, KS demo event subscriber? And the reason for that is because of the namespacing of PSR0. So because we're inside this namespace, there's never going to be a collision with another class called event subscriber, unless we were inside of a class that was, you know, using both our event subscriber and another namespace as event subscriber, in which case you'd have to, you know, use the full namespace, uh, uh, the full namespace name to reference it. But so the idea is that we don't have to reference the, you know, we don't have to prefix this with, you know, a bunch of extra information. Oops. With a bunch of extra information, because it already knows what namespace it's in. So that keeps it nice and clean, keeps it much nicer. All right, so if you were to look up the event subscriber interface in Drupal's API, you would see that it has just one defined method, and that's get subscribed events. And you get subscribed events, it tells you that it wants you to return an array of all the events that you're going to listen to, and what methods to call when that event happens. And so and then also, if you look up in the API kernel events, you can see a list of all the different types of events that happen there. And we want to listen for the terminate event, and that means the response finished, and it was sent to the user. And so after the response has been sent to the user, we want to check it and see if it was a 404, and if it was, then we want to do some stuff with it. So I think I want to back up for a moment and talk about how we actually get Drupal to be aware of this this new class, this new event subscriber that I've created. You know, because I've created the class, but that in itself isn't enough. We have to you know, let Drupal know about this service that we are creating. And so how we do that is with the service container. So let's go back to our. Okay. So you'll remember that service containers were the factory that create our service objects. And if we go back up to our module root, you can see I've defined a file here called ksdemo.services.yaml. And inside of that, we're defining our services. And ours is called ksdemo.subscriber. And we're telling it the class that is associated, the class name for the object that's going to be created for this service. And it's Drupal ksdemo event subscriber. And now we also have to give it a tag. We have to give it a tag with the name event subscriber. And this is what the service container uses to know what type of service we want it to instantiate here. So that is what gets picked up. This YAML file, ksdemoservices.yaml, is what gets picked up by Drupal 8 and processes those services into their objects. You know, creates, instantiates the objects. Okay, now let us take a look at the other YAML file that we have in this directory here, and that's called routing.yaml. ksdemo.routing.yaml, and this is where we define our custom routes, our custom paths that the Drupal routing system is going to look at and let us modify. And so this is equivalent to defining a hook menu item. Yes. So inside of our routes, we've got we're defining one called ksdemo.trigger404. And so what we're doing is actually we're creating a path So it's matching, and it is since it's going to be matched now. It shouldn't trigger a 404. It's going to be a real legitimate path on our system. But we're going to do something tricky, and when we uh, uh, get this path, we're actually going to create a new response object and send it back to the user and make them think that they got a 404. So let's take a look at how we do this. So first we define the controller that we want to use to set up this path, and that is inside of our modules lib directory. We've got a controller class that extends the controller interface, and we want to execute the trigger 404 method. And you can see here you can also set the permissions to view this page. Very similar to hook menu. So now let's go back into our lib directory and let's look at the controller class. You see it extends the controller interface, which if you look that up on the API, you can see that you have to implement the create method. And then down here is where we actually define the method that you saw in our YAML file that we told that route to execute. And it's really cool what we're doing here is with Symfony's HTTP kernel, I think it's HTTP kernel or HTTP foundation. One of the main Symfony components, it allows. Oh yeah, it's foundation. You can see from up here. It makes request and response handling really nice. And so what we're doing here is we're actually creating a new response object. We're giving it a status code of 404, giving it some content, and then sending it back to the user. So let's take a look at how this works in action. So let's open up ksdemo.dev. And I've got over here, I've got the database watchdog list over here, and we're going to clear it out. And if we go back real quick, if we go back to the event subscriber, you can see down here that we're not actually sending any mail just yet. We're actually just outputting to the watchdog when our response code was when our status code for the response was 404. All right, so let's first test this out just by going to a true 404 page. So I'm going to go to /foobar123asdf. So we got a 404, page not found. Now, if this works correctly, we should have an entry in the watchdog that says response was a 404, sending email. So let's see. Let's check out our watchdog. And voila! So we got our page not found error, and then we also have another entry that tells us that our response was a 404, and we're going to send an email. Now, the really cool thing about this is that we've managed to do all this, and I'm going to show you the next part as well, but I want to show you this first. We managed to do all this with a completely empty module file. How cool is that? There's absolutely nothing in our module file right now, and I just think that's awesome. No hooks. The hooks are still there in large part in Drupal 8, but we didn't have to use any of them. We're using Symfony, and we're using true object-oriented MVC model view controller architecture to build this out. And I just think that is so cool. All right, so now let's trick out our fake 404 page. So it was called, if you remember, the route was called trigger 404. So when we go there, we set up our own response object, filled it with some content, and sent it back. So let's see what happens. And there it is. So we created our own response object. We filled it with some text that says this is a custom 404, and then sent it back. And the coolest part of all this is that, let's go ahead and clear our log messages here real quick. Refresh this page. And now if we go back to our log messages here, you can see that our event subscribers still got picked up. So we created our own response object, sent it back to the user with a status code of 404, and our object-oriented code just automatically picked up that response and triggered it all the same. And I just think that's really powerful and really cool. And I think we'll leave it there for now.
Derek, good job. Has anyone created that you know of a map that can be used? Uh, I'm sorry, created a map of what used to be a hook and is now a class in D8?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Why would the create method return a new instantiation of itself?
I believe if we look at the Drupal API on that one, or the Symfony API for that matter, it's a Symfony interface. I believe it's just that that one follows the factory pattern, so that in order the interface wants to force you to sort of uh, uh, set up the object in a with the create method rather than the constructor. Why on that particular object, I'm not sure, but perhaps it might be that the interface declared the constructor private or something like that, and so it wants to force you to use the factory. Yeah, that's my guess.
Yeah, great presentation, Derek, and thanks everyone. We'll go ahead and get this up on the blog later this week or early next.
Very good. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.